This episode on information asymmetry may be our most important episode in Module 1, Perception, Narrative, and Mass Behavior. Because it explains why the mechanisms we explored earlier, propaganda, censorship, misinformation, and narrative control, are able to influence how societies think and make decisions. The reason is surprisingly simple. In complex societies, people rarely have access to the same information. Some actors know more than others. And when information is uneven, it changes how decisions are made in markets, institutions, and entire societies. To make this idea intuitive, let's start with a simple analogy. Imagine you're buying a used car. Maybe you've experienced something like this yourself, wondering what the seller knows that you don't. The seller knows the full history of the vehicle, how well it was maintained, whether it was ever in an accident, and whether expensive repairs might be coming soon. You, on the other hand, can only see what is visible. You can inspect the car and ask questions, but in the end the seller still knows more about the car than you do. And that difference matters. If buyers know less than sellers, they become cautious. They hesitate. They offer a lower price or walk away entirely. In other words, when one side knows more than the other, decisions change. Situations like this occur whenever information is unevenly distributed. And once you start looking for it, you see the same pattern throughout society. Which raises an important question. What happens in a society where citizens and institutions do not have access to the same information? To answer that, we need to understand a fundamental concept in the social sciences, information asymmetry. Earlier in this module, we explored how information and perception shape behavior in societies. We saw how information can be filtered, framed, amplified, or restricted, influencing how people interpret events. We also examined collective dynamics such as groupthink, expanding surveillance systems, and social credit systems. Together, these examples showed how powerful information environments can be in shaping how societies understand reality. But this raises a deeper question. Why are these mechanisms able to influence societies in the first place? Part of the answer lies in a simple idea. In many interactions, participants do not have access to the same information. Some actors know more than others or possess better knowledge about a situation. This condition is called information asymmetry. At first glance, this may seem like a small difference. But when information is uneven, it begins to influence decisions, and not just individual decisions. It can shape how entire systems behave. When information is uneven, it doesn't just affect individual transactions. It begins to shape how systems behave. While economists first saw this in markets, the same imbalance appears throughout modern societies. In complex societies, citizens rarely have access to the same information as institutions or governments. Many issues shaping public life, from economic policy to climate science to geopolitical strategy, involve levels of complexity that most individuals cannot easily verify. Which means many societal decisions happen under conditions of uneven knowledge. In modern societies, most people cannot independently verify many of the issues that shape public life. Some topics require highly specialized expertise. Other information exists inside large organizations or institutions, making it difficult for outsiders to observe. Even when information is available, analyzing it requires time, technical knowledge, and access to complex data. In other words, the world has become too complex for any individual to verify everything themselves. So people rely on intermediaries to interpret the world, experts, institutions, media organizations, and governments. When people rely on others to interpret complex information, something important happens. The interpretation of information becomes just as important as the information itself. And that is exactly where the mechanisms we explored earlier in this module begin to matter. When people cannot verify complex information themselves, they depend on how that information is presented and interpreted, which means the way information is framed begins to matter. Narratives influence how events are understood. Censorship influences what information becomes visible. Misinformation can distort how people interpret reality, and propaganda can shape how societies think about complex issues. In other words, information asymmetry creates the conditions under which these mechanisms can influence societies. Because people cannot verify everything themselves, societies rely on institutions and experts to interpret complex realities. Trust becomes the mechanism that allows complex societies to function despite uneven information. But this reliance creates an important tension. As societies become more complex, citizens must rely more on institutions to interpret the world. Yet in many societies today, trust in those institutions is declining. Modern societies therefore face a paradox. The systems people depend on to interpret reality are increasingly the systems they question. Information asymmetry simply means different actors possess different information. In complex societies, this imbalance is unavoidable. As knowledge becomes more specialized, information becomes uneven. Because individuals cannot verify everything themselves, societies rely on institutions and experts. That is the focus of the next part of the series. In Module 2, Power, Governance, and the State, we examine how institutions organize authority, enforce rules, and influence how societies make collective decisions. Because in societies shaped by information asymmetry, understanding power means understanding the institutions that interpret information. Information asymmetry is part of TNBC Explainers Module 1. Perception, Narrative, and Mass Behavior. Explore the TNBC Explainers course via the YouTube course list, or visit thenextbigcycle.world for the full course overview and background. This is The Next Big Cycle. TNBC Explainers, your guide to understanding the systems shaping the world around you. TNBC Explainers is a growing YouTube course. New concepts are added over time,